Carlos Alcaraz just lost to Sebastian Korda in the third round of the Miami Open, his second defeat in 3 matches after starting 2026 without losing a single set. Every channel is talking about Korda, but the story that actually matters started 4 months ago, 9 days before Christmas, when a short statement landed that changed the entire structure around the world number 1. In this video, we take you back to the Ferrero split, what really happened, who made the call, and the question that everyone in tennis is thinking, but very few are willing to say out loud. Is the environment around Alcaraz now the right one to push him through the moments that decide Grand Slams? On Sunday evening, at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, Carlos Alcaraz walked off the court, having lost to Sebastian Korda, the 36th ranked player in the world, a man who came into the match having never beaten a world number 1 in his career. At a crucial stage in the second set, with the match tilting away from him, Alcaraz turned to his bench and said something that cameras picked up clearly. Every channel has been running that clip, but nobody is connecting it to the real story. Stay with me, because what actually happened 4 months ago changes how you look at everything that is happening right now. The narrative being written about this loss is the easy one. Alcaraz had an off day. Korda played the match of his life. The world number 1 is still 17-2 on the season, and the clay courts are coming. That version of events is not wrong. It is just incomplete. And if you watch this channel, you know that incomplete is where we start, not where we finish. Because if you line up what has happened in the week since December 16th, the announcement, the reactions, the dynamics that followed, and then you look at how Alcaraz has moved and competed in the matches where he has been pushed, a very specific question begins to form. Not about his talent, not about his fitness, about his environment. About whether the people now standing in his corner when things get difficult are the right people for that particular job. On December 16th, 2025, 9 days before Christmas, a short joint statement confirmed what had been rumored for weeks. Juan Carlos Ferrero and Carlos Alcaraz were ending their coaching partnership after 7 years. 7 years that produced 6 Grand Slam titles, multiple Masters 1000 crowns, and a world number 1 ranking that Alcaraz has held for the majority of the last 3 years. Ferrero's contribution to that story is almost impossible to overstate. He found a teenager in Murcia who had extraordinary raw talent and extraordinary raw emotions, and he built around both of them, channeling the talent, steadying the emotions, installing the discipline and the belief system that turned potential into dominance. When Alcaraz became the youngest man in history to complete a career Grand Slam in Melbourne in January, Ferrero's fingerprints were on every single title in that collection. And then, 9 months after that Australian Open, he was gone. The official statement was mutual. The reality, according to everyone who has spoken on record since, was not. Ferrero's own words, given in a Marca interview shortly after the announcement, were the most revealing thing published about this situation. He said there were issues on which the two parties could not agree, and that it was possible those issues could have been resolved if they had sat down to talk. But in the end, they did not sit down. He said he was very hurt. That is not the language of a man who decided he was ready for a new challenge. That is the language of a man who has shown the door and is trying to process it with dignity. I would have liked to continue. There were issues on which the two parties didn't agree. It's possible they could have been resolved if we had sat down to talk, but in the end, we didn't sit down. Carlos Santos, who was Alcaraz's very first childhood coach and knows the family dynamics better than almost anyone outside the inner circle, was even more direct. He told Spanish media that it was Carlos's father who made the call, that Alcaraz himself would have continued with Ferrero for as long as Ferrero wanted to stay. His exact framing was that Carlos's father is the one who is really in charge, and that Carlitos had nothing to do with the decision. That is a significant thing to say publicly about the management structure of the world's best tennis player. Santos is not a tabloid source. He is someone who watched this family operate from the very beginning. When he says the father made the call, that carries weight. The deeper context, which emerged through multiple Spanish media investigations over the weeks that followed, pointed to a growing tension between Ferrero's way of doing things and the direction the Alcaraz family wanted to take. Ferrero operated the Equalite Academy in Villena with a specific philosophy: discipline, structure, daily presence, the kind of environment where complacency cannot exist because the coach will not allow it. That philosophy was what built Alcaraz. But at some point in 2025, Alcaraz became increasingly reluctant to make the drive to Villena, preferring to base himself at his family's own academy in El Palmar. The brother, Alvaro, was given a more active role on the team. The father's influence over the day-to-day environment grew, and Ferrero, a man who had spent 7 years demanding the highest standard from a player he genuinely loved, found himself in a structure that was no longer truly his to run. Toni Nadal, who spent 14 years doing exactly what Ferrero was doing for Alcaraz, read the situation with characteristic bluntness. He said publicly that it appeared to be Alcaraz who made the decision, and that whatever the reason was, it had to be a reason that goes beyond tennis. Toni Nadal understands better than anyone alive what it means to be a great coach in a family-run tennis operation. He also understands what it means when the family starts pulling in a different direction. His read on the Ferrero situation was not subtle. He said, "It seems to me like it was Alcaraz who made the decision. The reason is not about tennis. It has to be a reason that goes beyond tennis." So that is the full context behind the split. Now the question that matters: who stepped into that space, and what does that actually mean for Alcaraz going forward? Samuel Lopez is 55 years old, from Alicante, and has been involved in professional tennis coaching for the majority of his adult life. He was part of the original group that helped found the Ferrero Academy in Vienna, meaning he and Ferrero go back decades, and the transition was framed publicly as a natural continuation rather than a rupture. Lopez had been working alongside Ferrero as part of Alcaraz's team since late 2024. So his appointment as head coach was not a cold introduction. He knew the player, he knew the systems, and Alcaraz spoke about him with genuine warmth when the appointment was confirmed. He said Lopez was one of the best technical coaches in the world, if not the best, and that he brings things no other coach today can bring. Lopez's professional background is real and substantive. His most significant prior role was 9 years coaching Pablo Carreño Busta, during which time he helped take a talented but inconsistent Spanish player to a career-high ranking of world number 10, a U.S. Open semifinal, and an Olympic bronze medal. That is a genuine achievement. Carreño Busta is not a simple player to coach. He is technically demanding, emotionally complex, and requires careful management. Lopez navigated all of that across nearly a decade. He is not a rookie. He is not a figurehead. He knows what elite-level professional coaching requires. But here is the honest question, and it is one that deserves a direct answer rather than the diplomatic version. Carreño Busta peaked at world number 10. He is a very good tennis player who in his best moments was capable of beating anyone. He is not Carlos Alcaraz. He is not a player who arrives at every Grand Slam as one of the 2 or 3 people expected to win it. He is not a player carrying the weight of historical comparisons to Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic on a daily basis. The ceiling Lopez was coaching towards with Carreño Busta and the ceiling he is now coaching towards with Alcaraz are categorically different things. That does not make him unqualified, but it makes the job genuinely harder than anything he has done before, and harder in ways that cannot be fully prepared for until you are living inside it. There is also the question, and I want to be careful here because this is genuinely contested, of whether a coach who was never himself a top professional player carries a different kind of authority in those very specific moments. Ferrero was a world number one. He won Roland Garros. He had been in the biggest matches, felt the biggest pressures, and carried the weight of expectation that comes with being the best in the world. When he told Alcaraz something in a changeover at a Grand Slam semifinal, he was speaking from lived experience at exactly that level. Lopez's playing career reached a solid professional standard, but not the elite tier. That does not make his advice less technically valid. But there is an argument, and serious people within the tennis world have made it quietly, that authority in those moments is partly built on having been there yourself. Right now, I want to show you something that crystallizes this entire question into one specific moment, and I will come back to it in about 3 minutes. Because first, we need to look at what the results under Lopez as sole head coach actually show. Alcaraz went 16-0 with Lopez alongside Ferrero, and then solely with Lopez to start the year, winning the Australian Open and the Doha title. 16 matches, 0 losses. That is the argument for Lopez working perfectly. The counter-argument is the nature of those 2 losses since, because the pattern in both of them is striking. Against Medvedev in the Indian Wells semifinal, and against Korda at Miami, the player who beat him was flat, aggressive, hitting through the court with pace and precision, taking the ball early and not giving Alcaraz time to impose his game. Both Medvedev and Korda, very different players in almost every other respect, won by being disciplined, structured, and willing to outgrind the world number one through the match's critical moments, rather than trying to out-creativity him. The tactical prescription for beating Alcaraz, when he is not at his absolute best, is becoming visible. Whether Lopez has the tools to adjust to it is a question we will have a much clearer answer to by the end of the clay season. Now, that moment from the Korda match that every channel has been running, down a set, facing a break, at 1-2 in the second. Alcaraz turned to his bench and said clearly and audibly, "I'm going home. I'm going home. At most I can do a 6-3, 6-4, 6-3, 7-5. I can't do more." And from the Lopez side of the bench came the reply, "Suelta el órdago," a Spanish idiom that means something like raise the stakes, go all in, stop playing it safe, and just commit. Alcaraz responded. He won 4 consecutive games, took the second set 7-5, and suddenly the match was level. Lopez's intervention worked, and the people defending the current setup will point to that exchange as proof that the coaching relationship is exactly what it should be, and they are not wrong to point to it. The intervention was good. The response from Alcaraz was excellent. But look at the conversation from the other direction, because the more unsettling detail is not Lopez's answer. It is Alcaraz's question. This is the world number one, a player who started the year 16-0, a player who has won 7 Grand Slams, and in a third-round match at a Masters 1000 event against the 36th player in the world, he was at a changeover telling his coach that he cannot do any more and that he wants to go home. That level of frustrated resignation, however briefly it lasted before he pulled himself back, is not something you would have expected to see during the Ferrero years. It is not a reflection of talent. It is a reflection of the internal environment. And the internal environment around Alcaraz right now is shaped primarily by his family. With a new coach who has never operated at this altitude before, I want to be honest about the limits of this argument, because intellectual honesty is what separates real analysis from hot takes. There is a completely valid version of this story in which Alcaraz just had 2 difficult matches after an extraordinary run of form, in which Lopez grows into the role across the clay season and beyond, and in which the Ferrero split turns out to be irrelevant to what happens on court in the long run. Alcaraz lost in the first round in Miami last year to Goffin, ranked 55th, and then went on to win Roland Garros, Wimbledon, and the US Open in the same calendar year. A bad few weeks in the Florida sunshine does not define a career. He is 22 years old. He is still the best player in the world. None of that has changed. But the Ferrero question cannot just be filed away as irrelevant because the results have been mostly good. The clay season is arriving. Monte Carlo, Madrid, Rome, Roland Garros. And this is the stretch of the year where the margins are smallest, where the matches are longest, where the mental architecture of a player is tested in ways that do not exist on hard courts. Alcaraz on clay under Ferrero was something genuinely special. The 2024 Roland Garros final against Zverev, the 2025 Roland Garros title. Those performances came from a player who was surrounded by a structure built for that exact surface, those exact stakes. Whether Lopez can build that same architecture, or whether the family-led environment around Alcaraz will allow someone to build it, is the most important unanswered question in men's tennis right now. Not because Alcaraz is vulnerable. He is not vulnerable in any conventional sense of the word, but because the gap between a good result and a great one, between a quarterfinal and a title, between winning a tight third set and losing it, that gap is almost entirely mental. And the mental structure around the world number one has changed in ways that nobody has fully mapped yet. The debate plant that I want to leave here, and I genuinely want to hear what you think in the comments, is this. Do you believe that a coach who was never himself a world-class player can take a player to the absolute ceiling of what they are capable of? Or is there something irreplaceable about being guided in the highest pressure moments by someone who has stood exactly where you are standing? Ferrero had stood there. Lopez has not. That does not end the argument. The Roland Garros draw comes out in late May. By then, we will have Monte Carlo, Madrid, and Rome to look at. We will have had months of Lopez as the sole voice in Alcaraz's corner. We will have a much clearer picture of whether the current setup is growing into what it needs to be, or whether the questions being asked quietly in tennis circles right now are starting to get louder. Come back to this video when that draw is released, because everything we have discussed today will either look prescient or look like overcautious noise, and the clay courts will be the judge. If this kind of analysis is what you come here for, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because we are tracking this story all the way through the clay season. Drop your take in the comments. Are you concerned about the direction of Alcaraz's team, or do you think this is being massively overcomplicated? The most interesting takes always end up at the top, so get in there.